So a few weeks ago, Captain Marvel dropped in theaters, and I have to say I had a blast watching it. Despite the controversy surrounding the casting choice, I still stand by the claim that Brie Larson did a fantastic job making Carol Danvers a likable character. Thankfully, I was able to ignore the controversy and enjoy the film, so let's jump right into what did and didn't work with Marvel's newest installment. Alright, so for those of you who don't know, Captain Marvel is the 21st installment in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which follows an alien soldier named Veers, whose real name is Carol Danvers, stranded on our planet after a battle with her race's mortal enemy, a shape-shifting alien race named the Skrulls. She learns that in order to regroup with her team, she must work with the government agents on Earth, so the movie details the relationship between Veers and one of the government agents, Nick Fury. Throughout the film, she discovers there's more to her past than her team initially let on, and she attempts to piece together what's really going on with the Skrulls on Earth. Alright, so summary and spoilers out of the way, let's get into it. Keep in mind I'm going to be rating the cinematography, acting, and story elements of this film on a scale of 1 to 10. The average of all three will be the official rating I'm giving it. So let's start with the cinematography. The cinematography and visual elements of Marvel films have never been something to sneer at, and Captain Marvel is no exception. I personally think the wide shots and filters this film uses are incredibly breathtaking and never get stale or obnoxious. A really good example of what I'm talking about is this wide shot of Nick Fury and Veers driving down a desert road, and I'm not gonna lie, the music here and the camera angle, it just makes this shot a whole lot more interesting. And the film is full of crazy things like this. There's this scene in the storage room of an Air Force base that tries to capture the length of it when the scene is just as boring as two people talking. I actually remember in the beginning of the film, we're shown lovely depictions of advanced civilizations and alien rooms, and then we're quickly brought into a very intriguingly lit alien battle zone where we get an extremely tense action and espionage sequence. The camera makes sure to capture the expressions of everyone and keep the fog thick enough so that we always question the safety of the characters in the moment. And don't get me started on the fight scenes. Personally, when watching battles, I like to see the impact and result of every attack, and I think Captain Marvel does this very well, especially with the fight scenes in the third act. Everything about the fight scenes are incredibly satisfying when you see Carol combine her powers and objects around her in order to get the upper hand. However, what I liked most about Captain Marvel's cinematography was the numerous different shots of 1990s Los Angeles, which I'm sure to a lot still felt like an incredibly different planet. Panning shots of metro trains and friggin' blockbuster video stores really help immerse you into believing that this specific event is taking place in 1990. So in short, I'd give Captain Marvel's cinematography about an 8 out of 10. Personally, because I believe shows like Daredevil take the cake with their fight scenes and noir film techniques, so I'd give those a 10 out of 10. But that's not to say that Captain Marvel's didn't absolutely blow me away. The next up is acting. A lot of people criticize Brie Larson's performance, claiming it was bland, but I think that's an unfair assertion. Brie Larson's acting ability, while not something I've personally had the chance of viewing enough, is held to a high standard. And Captain Marvel felt like the characters had real chemistry and development. I will admit, some character changes occurred a little quicker than expected, so that led to an unrealistic shift in performance from Larson, but I don't think her portraying Veers as a more silent type really indicates a bad performance. I think everyone did a great job in this film. The connection Brie and Sam Jackson had was really nice and felt real, and so did the mother-daughter dynamic between Lashana Lynch and Akira Akbar. I remember in the theater I had the dumbest grin on my face just because everyone seemed so friendly, even when they were fighting. And despite Captain Marvel feeling as gritty as it was, it still managed to possess that classic Marvel levity we all know and love. The acting I'll give about a 7. It was great and realistic, but I feel like rating it an 8 or 9 would be unfair to emotional roller coasters like Schindler's List or Breaking Bad. Now lastly, I'd like to discuss the story and writing. Now this is where there's going to be spoilers, so if you've not seen the movie yet and don't want it spoiled for you, go ahead and skip to this timestamp. Alright, let's go. Captain Marvel's story was actually pretty fast-paced, but I don't think that's a problem at all. It's entirely possible that learning about Carol's past could have made for a good first act, or they could have gone with the Deadpool approach and flesh out her backstory during the actual events of the film in the form of flashbacks or cutaways. Now, Captain Marvel starts with us meeting her team and those she's been living with for the past several years, which is a pretty good starting condition considering the intended twist and the fact that this is all Carol remembers as of now. This part of the movie is followed up with Danvers' team attempting to rescue one of their team members after they're kidnapped by the Skrulls. This leads to Carol being captured and interrogated for information. Carol escapes and arrives on Earth with the Skrulls. This entire part of the film felt very neat and not any longer or shorter than it needed to be. I remember being very satisfied with the pacing. When Carol arrives on Earth and meets Nick Fury, it turns into what I can only describe as a buddy comedy, as it's mainly them for the rest of the film. Throughout the second act is what I describe as a necessary period used to further the narrative and set up conflict. There's nothing too radical about the problem though, as despite how hard they try and convince the audience that the Skrulls are on Earth to take it over, there's still a feeling of uncertainty I had when it came to the Skrulls, and whether or not I really saw them as a threat. We learn that the entire race is actually being oppressed by the Kree, the race that Carol was a part of, so this leads into a whole change of dynamic amongst the characters, which I think was done pretty well. The Skrulls are typically ruthless and bad guys in the comics, so this was definitely an interesting change. Now, as for the quality of writing itself, I think, in typical Marvel fashion, it was very good. There were no discernible plot holes during my viewing experience, and I'd say the dialogue was more realistic than normal. I feel like the change from situational humor to inside jokes really made the humor a lot better, and the dialogue felt like real people were saying it, as opposed to the overly charismatic characters we see all the time. Frankly, I think Captain Marvel just had a really solid and interesting story. I give it a 9 out of 10. So there we have it. The combined score is 8 out of 10, for its impeccable cinematography, acting, and story. Captain Marvel, released in 2019. I highly recommend you go watch it.